There's the door you came in from. If there is some kind of emergency, please rendezvous at Camino Ramon. So basically, I think it's where we all came in today. It's a good walk. It's hot outside, but that's where we're going to meet if there is anything that comes up. Welcome, everyone. I think we want to make sure to get started on time. We have some folks joining us online. We have 2 minutes. While we're waiting, who all here is from PG&E territory? California, Northern Central California. Okay, most folks. Anyone from California not PG&E territory? Okay, we got one. Anyone from outside of the state? Several. Anyone from outside of the country? Where are you coming from? Next door. Okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so lots of folks from outside of California, but few neighbors from outside of PG&E joining us. So I'm gauging. We're going to talk about all sorts of things here. I think we can kick it off. Should we get us started online? Let me know when we're live online. Okay, we're live. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Very exciting to be here with you. This is the most people I have seen in a long time. So my name is Trevor Udwin. I'm going to get us started. I'm a principal here at PG&E, and I focus initially a lot on behind the meter policy. So everything from net metering to demand response. And I've since moved into a more demand response focused role. So I'm learning with you about load management. Joining me on the stage, we have Michael McCarty, who is a manager in the distribution planning group. So we're going to learn a lot about how we think about our distribution system today. And then finally, John Hernandez over here is also a manager, and he's in the UP&I group. And so thinking about utility partnerships and innovation, which happens to be one of our subjects today. We're excited to be here with you, and we welcome all the folks coming in from online. Sorry you can't be here in person, but glad to have you. So I'm just going to kick things off. It was tempting to ask everyone here to give me the definition of load management. We're not doing that. And the reason is, even if you work at a utility, that gets a little complex very quickly. I've seen 20-year friendships break. No, it's not true. A little bit of history. You guys all know this. You work in the space, but let's be honest. We started with big power plants, and we knew what load looked like. We had a pretty dang good idea anyway. And we planned for that. And that's how it was for generations. Not to say we didn't have challenges. They just weren't based so much around load and the diversity of load. That has changed dramatically. And Mr. Musk and our CEO, Patty, were alluding to that earlier, which is we have all sorts of potential going both directions on our grid. And this isn't just focusing on actual electric flow, electrons going back and forth. It's also focusing on how we plan going both ways. What does it mean if we have vehicle to grid in numbers that we may have in 10 years? What does it mean if our customers are responding to signals? How many of our customers are going to respond to the signals that we send to them? These are all questions that have billion-dollar impacts, and we are doing our best to work with you. And today is a big breakout moment for that, to think about how we're going to do that. On the bottom left, you'll see we're also thinking about markets. We're not going to spend too much time focusing on this today, but we do want to emphasize that we are thinking about a more nodal market system. What does it look like if we're decentralized in that way? And in addition to that, of course, we have a more central market system where it passes through a central focal point, and the market clears in that way. And then finally, and maybe for me, what I can talk to you most about today is the customer. We have a lot of customer programs, and these programs are meant to both help the customer save energy, but also to help us save the grid. and use it, as Patty described, in a maximize the utilization of the grid. However, we don't want a million programs. We want to have a few programs that customers can use that maybe they don't have to be thinking about all the time, but that can benefit them in those ways. And so my colleagues here are going to talk a little bit first about how we plan for those situations, but then how we think about technology and innovation that could bring more simplified and more straightforward customer programs. So with that, I'm going to introduce or bring on Mike, and he's going to go into more depth about the distribution side of this and how we're thinking about that.
All right. They give me a lapel mic because the podium mic doesn't work as well for me. So too much hunching over. All right. So as Trevor mentioned, I'm in distribution planning. And I think about, we're talking about expanding load management capabilities. And I think back to one of my first experiences with load management in operations, where we had a transmission line that was forecasted to be overloaded. And so we're looking at what options we have on the demand side to relieve that overload. So we had a program that we could call to reduce the load, but the only way for us to call it was based on zip code. And that transmission line was looking at more than one zip code. So we had to think about what are all the zip codes, what's the opportunity there, and call the event and see what happens. Now that worked in that particular example because it's a transmission line, it's serving a somewhat larger area that's not perfect, but it did work and provided some opportunity or some relief there. But the peaks on the system are becoming less correlated with that of the distribution system or that of a line section level at a customer level. It's becoming less correlated. And similarly, the customer load profiles are becoming less correlated with a distribution peak or with a transmission peak. And so historically, these load management programs have been used for peak shaving at the system level, but we need more granular load management capabilities to optimize around that. Our optimization needs to consider the customer level. It needs to consider the distribution line section level that's feeding a particular area of town, or the feeder that's serving a larger area of town, or the substation that serves that entire town, and then the transmission system. So we need to focus on all those different levels, and we can't just be calling something based on, say, a zip code. So that's something that we're bringing up here and calling for and asking this group. Similarly, behind the meter, when you think about the customer, that's getting more complex as well. We have distributed energy resources that are behind the meter. We have new technology that we don't know about. We have electric vehicles, and we also have a combination of all of those. So from a long-term planning perspective, what do we expect to occur behind the meter? And how is that going to materialize into our load profile? From a real-time operations perspective, what do we expect to occur based on that technology being behind the meter? What loads are occurring in real time? What loads are flexible? We need a solution that can comprehensively tell us about that. Like it says here on the screen, asset type, usage, location data at frequent intervals. When I think about, like the neighbor effect, let's think about, you're in your neighborhood and your neighbor adopts some sort of new technology. Because that your neighbor adopted that new technology, you have a propensity to adopt that as well. You are more likely to adopt that. And so from a load growth perspective or a load forecasting perspective, we need more information about that so that we can make that prediction. Because like Elon and Patty discussed this morning, load growth is happening. It's more than we've ever seen before, and it will be more. And so we need to be able to get it right, because that has big implications. Load growth isn't flat. It's going up. So we need to be able to get it right. And that's where this type of information is going to be helpful. So John here is going to talk about, from a computational perspective, what does that mean when we get that information?
Great. Thanks, Mike. Before I begin, I just want to say first, hope everyone had a great lunch and everyone's energized and alive again, especially with this morning's keynote speakers. The one thing I wanted for you guys to take away today, given that Patty and everyone else stole my thunder here, as far as the edge grid computation, right? The challenge that we have in front of us is really at the intersection of customer and grid, right? A lot of the challenges, the problems that we are now surfacing really boils down to, can we manage the grid based on, in this case, assets that we may or may not have to power our customers. On the other end of it, there is the customer. Given that the customer is contingent upon what type of behavior they may have, this creates a quite challenging opportunity for us to solve, which is load management, right? Grid needs, customer needs. We have this Venn diagram right in the middle that provides and offers what from a customer feels like just a day in the life. And so what we are asking for in this particular space, the edge grid, is computation that gives us more instantaneous information bidirectionally. Schedules provide us an opportunity to help not only planning for system, local, and generation needs, but also how we're going to be able to operate this in the future, right? So there's plenty of opportunities and plenty of use cases that we can experiment here. So you might ask, where exactly is this going to take place? And right now, we have this notion, this imagination of what if we use the current meter socket that we have today, where our current AMI is currently installed. And right now, although AMI does provide granular data sets, I think we can do more. And I know we can do more. We've seen innovative technologies out there, but it's just a matter of how do we piece this together to make it look like an 80s cartoon like Voltron, right? 5 different parts come together to make a big robot, right? The idea is, how can we get there? And so we are trying to imagine with everyone in this room, what can we really do, right? What if the socket has the functionality to do demand limiting? And let me explain what demand limiting here, or amp limiting. Patty alluded and talked about our September 6th challenge, where the governor had to press the red button that says, California is in dire need of conservation, please do so. What if the socket has the functionality in certain events to actually do demand limiting so that our hometown customers actually gets the power they need, even though it's not the entirety of what they need, and it's a portion of it, it may very well still be a valuable asset commodity for them to have. Because at the end of it, we need to make sure that they can prioritize what they need to prioritize within the home, whether it be refrigerating their food or getting cooler temperature for comfort purposes or health purposes. As you guys can tell, and probably have heard, Arizona, Phoenix has experienced, was it 25 days of extreme weather condition of above 110. That could happen to us as well, especially our inland valleys. So we got to consider what opportunities we have from that socket perspective through controls. Can we imagine a world where we could actually provide some energy with limits so that our customers are not left in the dark? Another opportunity here is towards the far right here, or far left on my end, is the deeper visibility to customers. Imagine if we have the data, disaggregation data, that gives us an understanding of what is on during local, system, and generational peaks, that we can identify and go to the customer and say, what if we do this, depending on your behavior's elasticity? And if it's not, could we look for other solutions like battery Powerballs, interchangeables, that gives enough of this resiliency, this reliability back to our customers? And at the same time, we could do greater impacts towards energy efficiency. If we know what's being used and we can determine that it's no longer an appliance that is coded for efficiency, there's an opportunity for us to upsell as well. So I think the edge of the grid gives us an opportunity to reimagine how we interact with our customers, especially as the generational consumer buying power is going from one generation to the next. We need to better understand exactly what is it that they need to make sure that we're delivering the services that we promise them. With that, I am going to turn it to Q&A. Yes. Do we have a runner? Sorry. Just want to make sure we have a. Oh, it's for the folks in the.
Thanks for the presentation. Joe Sullivan with Pice Energy Solutions in San Diego. Effectively, though, if I if I maybe boil this down, I mean, isn't this what you're at the edge, right behind the meter? This is what your DERMS is supposed to do.
I think also, we have a DERMS PM here as well, but let me take a first stab at it. I think the controls of the signal will be directly to the edge device. The question is who's ingesting that information, right? For example, when I think of DERMS, I think of it as more of the central and edge notification controls. But towards the home, there's got to be a control there that allows for it to ingest and figure out if the limits are X, what can I do? And a customer cannot necessarily solve that. And so we see this as an opportunity to rely on other third parties, Silicon Valley, to maybe offer a service within that edge to say, if DERMS is saying this, I've chose company X to help me optimize this for my residents. That could be a possibility of an exchange between a customer, a third party, and the grid using a DERMS control system.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I think it just gets complicated.
Yes.
Again, essentially your DERMS is responsible for managing and balancing load behind the net load to the meter. That's what your DERMS is responsible for doing.
You could say that. True.
No,
Active or
I'm
passive.
a DERMS provider. So that's what I'm saying.
Well, I think it's one thing to say we're actually trying to look for that optimal schedule, but it's another thing for the customer to accept it. So for us to just say, here's an active control for you, I think we still have to go through the customer. What exactly is the customer willing to accept through comfort, through their elastic or inelastic behavior? Fair enough.
Hi, Sasha Sabaratnam, former small town mayor. So I love where you're going with this. And I think there could be a lot of really interesting information, but so visibility into customer usage patterns is going to be vastly different for different subsections of that, right? Like, so if you're talking about, at the home versus, multifamily versus commercial or more industrial, how are you thinking about that whole mix together? Because the number of customers is greater versus the amount of usage, right? So
Exactly.
How are you thinking about that?
I think that's one where we would need assistance and help. But conceptually, the way I look at it, it really is a puzzle piece, right? You have what we call potentially, Mike can give me a load curve that the distribution folks need in order for us to operate safely and reliably, right? Part of that equation then is how many residents, what kind of customer segments are actually within this particular circuit? And can we then come up with an optimal schedule that meets everyone's needs or possibly even everyone's comfort at that point? So I think there's going to be more of the granular slicing and dicing to understand the composition of what those resources needs to be in order to support, in this case, a distribution circuit challenge. Exactly. And I think it goes back to the gentleman here, the DERMS provider, that says something along the lines of schedules, right? Like, I think I see that as if we have a better understanding of the customer's behavior, because I really feel that the behavior itself creates some of the challenges here. If everyone follows the same schedule, great. But if not, we start to deviate. We got to be able to mobilize and come up with either physical hardening or maybe a temporarily hardening just to make sure we carry that load. Oh, perfect.
All right, two online questions. The first one, most votes on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most educated, engaged. How much customer engagement do you envision will be needed to meet the goals of the future? If it's a high level of customer engagement, are you considering customer education campaign? This is from Jennifer Salucci.
I could take that, and maybe if you guys can offer additional thoughts. I think I want to be careful with using the word education, right? I want to make sure that we respect our customers because I know that they have their own ability to ingest and understand what it is that they would want to. I think from my perspective, we need more guidance, whether it's from 8, 9, or 10. I think it's somewhere within that realm of providing and offering kind of the guidance to our customers to have them make the right decision. Now, I understand that sometimes that's a bit challenging of a proposition to ask, but at the same time, if we can narrow it down and still offer solutions and options, I think that might be something that is acceptable. But this is still a trial period for us, right? I think it's one thing to say that we're ready to go, but as I mentioned, generationally, it may be different with the next generation coming in on how far they want to have this engagement. Maybe it's more intimate than others. So I'm going to turn it over to Jan here.
One additional point. I would say there's a big difference between engagement and participation as well, right? If we're talking, Patty mentioned like things like outages being invisible. Maybe actually your engagement is invisible, but you know about your participation. So if you're sleeping, do you care that your car charged from midnight to 8 a.m. or do you care that it's charged when you get in it? So same thing goes from heating or cooling a house. You know, you care that it's warm or it's cool, not necessarily exactly how it gets there. So.
Thank you. So Jan Griggier, electric rates, and lately it's been real-time pricing, dynamic rates, that kind of thing. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's a grand challenge that I think is as big as the technological challenges. I think, John, you were trying to say that yourself. At the moment, so PG&E did a pretty extensive customer survey around the beginning of this year because we're working on real-time pricing rates. And I'll give you a couple of snippets from it. So first of all, only about a third of customers were interested in true real-time pricing, where it varies every day or whatever. Most customers just want to stay on their same rate, and a decent number are interested in something like critical peak pricing, where you get event pricing, right? But real-time pricing is that no. Especially when we tell them what real-time pricing do, right? Go up to $2 a kilowatt hour or whatever. So the other thing about control. Most customers, about 50% of customers just want to be able to control their own loads. They don't want anybody else doing it. About 30% are interested in PG&E potentially controlling their loads, and only 20% are third party. We were kind of surprised because PG&E does not have, we've had a contentious history with customers lately in terms of people blaming us for all kinds of things, whether we did it or not. So we were surprised that people actually were more interested in PG&E controlling than third parties, but it was still, only 30%. So my sense is that there will have to be a great deal of education and convincing. And that is truly, that's one of the grand challenges here. It's not just, it's not a question of if you build an iPhone, everybody will get it. Part of the problem there is the neighbor effect doesn't work nearly as well for DERMs and, heat pumps or whatever, right? You have a Tesla, it's sitting in your driveway. Everybody sees it. You have solar panels, they're on your roof. Everybody sees it. You have a heat pump or a controller, nobody sees it. So the neighborhood effect doesn't work as well with that. And we're really interested in your ideas on how to get more customers to be interested in these solutions that we really think are going to help. Thank you.
Oh, there's one point from your customer research that I think is extremely important to answering this question, which is customers who were already on a TOU or more dynamic type rate were much more likely and willing to consider a real-time pricing rate. And so I think that when we talk about customer education and reaching out to them and trying to figure out what's best for them, there are stepped phases. There's not an A to Z immediate, jump. And I think that that's something we're learning and that we have to consider as we move towards these important solutions. So,
yep. Thank you. Totally agree.
Second online question: with demand limiting being an example of load management given in this setting, has this concept been shared with the public for feedback? That's from Nicholas Roberts.
I'm sorry, what's the last part of that?
I'll just read the whole thing. With demand limiting being an example of load management given in this setting, has this concept been shared with the public for feedback?
Not yet. We're still going through the motions of what exactly could we imagine to help provide that level of reliability. And so I think we're still in the maturation phase of what this could look like.
Every single day on
Hi, my name is Olivia Wastanese and I work at Ford on the grid services team. I'm curious for your perspectives and the perspectives of anyone else in the room who wants to share around how many interfaces customers are willing to entertain in this space. You know, obviously a given household may have a smart thermostat, they might have an EV, they might have solar panels. There are, you know, any number of DER devices behind the meter. Something tells me this isn't the kind of thing where customers are going to have like 5 subscriptions like they do Netflix, Apple TV, you know, whatever. I'm curious, I guess, for your perspectives on like how many platforms, I guess, or apps are appropriate here, are sort of within the envelope of what a good customer experience looks like.
Yeah, so I think the numbers don't necessarily do the justice. It's really what the functionality is and the controls, right? So if you have a Nest thermostat, a Tesla vehicle, etc., in my mind is a question of how do you consolidate that and still have the customer be able to have the controls within that one app, right? Because otherwise, if they have to jump from app to app to app, it's also concerning that they may not actually understand what they're pressing at that point, given that each application may have its different functionality and end results. So I think from my perspective, this is another area where simple is better, right? I think we tried to develop in-home display about 13 years ago and it failed miserably. Part of it is because there was no controls. There's no interface cloud to cloud at that point. Could we then consider bringing that similar concept back and have that IHD, that in-home display connected to our meter, be able to offer not just data, but also controls? But that's going to take a village and working with all the OEMs to provide that level of cloud interface, that API to API development here. Because otherwise, if there's only going to be certain relationships and structures, it may not work out for the customer, right? Like if the customer is using iOS, but all their devices isn't interoperable, I think we're creating a different challenger for our customers' acceptance here.
John Powers with Alexity. Just want to comment that while you may survey customers who don't like change, because none of us do, I go to Ahmed Faruqi, who with Patel has, who's he with? Brattle Group, that's right. So he did a presentation at Distributech recently, shall we do another pilot? And he presented the results of 144 time of use and real-time pricing pilots. We know how customers respond to these things. I know PG&E's customers are different. He included PG&E and many other customer surveys that have been done before. The key to acceptance in these things is automation. No one wants to get into the energy management system and fly it all day. Nobody wants to work for PG&E while they are using their appliances or devices at work. So as long as there is, in addition to education and engagement, as long as there's engagement with the automation community, then there is a hope that adoption will go faster. And if you can make it in the customer's interest through automation to respond to prices, you'll see a much faster uptick. I don't have a question.
Well, +1, John. And I just wanted to let the folks in the room know and those in the virtual land that there are current forums like the CEC's load management standards and the CalFlex Hub that both the CEC commissioned with through LBNL. So there are opportunities for us to see what that future looks like, but it'll take everyone in this room and those in internet land to help contribute to what that looks like. Following question.
This is a question from online from Justin Ford. I think the ethical dilemma of limiting power at the customer's home in emergencies is, does it provide the circumstances for the utility to improve? Or does the utility continue to operate under current capacity constraints perpetually? That's the next vote getter.
Repeat that one more time. I want to make sure I hit on it all.
pardon me, I think the ethical dilemma of limiting power at the customer's home in emergencies is, does it provide the circumstances for the utility to improve? Or does the utility continue to operate under current capacity constraints perpetually?
Yeah, I mean, I guess two thoughts come to mind for that as opportunities. One of them is, as far as load limiting is concerned, there's always the concept of reserve capacity. And I think that, like, reserve capacity, say in a home energy storage device, if you're load limited, that you could rely on some level of reserve capacity for those emergencies. That's one thing that comes to mind in response to that. Also, another thing is from a load management perspective, is it can also be a bridge or an interim solution while a conventional upgrade is completed. So if it takes several years to design, permit, and construct an infrastructure project, there's an opportunity to offer some level of interim capacity while that project is completed to serve the full capacity.
So actually, there's an example of that. There's one particular circuit where a certain large EV manufacturer wants to put in some really fast chargers, and we don't have enough room on that circuit. So we are working with them to limit the total capacity. So if like 20 cars show up at once, they'll get slower charging. But if only 10 show up, they'll be at full speed. And that's working very well. So that's one particular example. EV charging is a really easy one. But admittedly, a residential circuit with, 100 homes in a row and nobody has batteries is a harder one.
We have another one.
One more online question for the last slide that John presented, which I believe is that one that's still up there. Do you envision that socket level control happening through AMI meters, through smart panels at the home? What exactly are you picturing?
Sorry, can you repeat the last one? Sorry, it's hard to hear from.
Sorry. Let me move this up here. For the slide that John has up there, do you envision that socket level control happening through AMI meters, through smart panels at the home, or what exactly are you picturing for control?
Yeah, great
Answer
question.
yes.
Eli.
Exactly. All the above. No, I think this is one where, if there are solutions to retrofit our current AMI to allow for such functionality, I think that's one way for us to explore that. And I think, again, it's going to come through the innovation from this group, as well as others out there. But at the same time, Quinn continues to push us towards, if it's not AMI, then what should it be? And could we include all the functionalities needed? So I think right now we're playing both sides of, could we retrofit our existing infrastructure to do such functionalities and services here? And on the other end, let's try to reimagine if it's cheaper or costly or more reliable towards the tail end of this, should we endeavor to develop what that product is with this community?
Mark Erdoman, Stanford, GSB. What you described, John, reminded me a lot about the regulated electricity market prior to the deregulation. Like, system operator needed to know everything and then do the optimization. And we see the benefits of deregulation. There were some problems at the beginning. It was scary to bid. But there are right now like trading desks and some other financial tools to help the generators and also utilities. So my question is, like, I can see a future where that could be the case for customers as well. But I definitely agree with the gentleman from, but that needs to be done by automation. So my question is, can PG&E create right cost signals to customers for customers to decide what to do, basically?
Yeah, John, you want to take this one since it's really.
So as part of this demand flex OIR that we're involved in, it's not just about sort of what you could call vanilla real-time pricing. There are all kinds of layers on top of it. So one of them is subscription or two-part real-time pricing. And that one, that's to give customers a hedge effectively, right? So the idea there is that for most of your load, you're paying what your regular tariff would be, whether it's flat or at the time of use or something. And then the delta between what your sort of regular load was, the subscription amount, we call it, and what you actually use in any given hour is charged the real-time price. And that way, if you get, the Texas freeze thing or the California, huge prices for a while, most of your load is kind of insulated from that. But you still have at the margin exactly the same price signal, exactly the same incentives. We see subscription prices as really useful, but they're also complicated to explain to customers. You say, oh, sunk costs, what the heck does that mean, right? Another one is transactive pricing, which is literally paying, sort of reserving power ahead of time, maybe up to a week ahead because you have decent weekend forecasts. Some parties are looking for actual true options. Now, the really big customers, the big dogs, they don't have to deal with that because they all have gas hedges. And that effectively does the same thing in a lot of places. PG&E actually looked at hydro hedging a while ago, a few years ago, and we realized that we didn't need it because the gas hedges did exactly the same thing. So there are all kinds of instruments, and the catch is which customers are going to use them. The big dogs, yeah, they'll find something. And residential, I'm not sure. We're trying to find something that's simple enough to explain to them that they will actually sign up for, but that doesn't kill them in the end. Because, yeah, you get a long period of high gas prices, which boosts electricity prices for 3 months in a row, people drop off, right? That happened for us last year. Our most successful program, although it's not huge in megawatts, is called BIP around here. And we had like 70% load reductions during it's amazing. And we also lost like a huge chunk of the BIP customers because they didn't want to be called that often. So it's a tricky issue. That's why I mentioned, this getting customers to sign up and stay on is a problem as difficult as all the things up on the board.
Can I just real quick before next question? I just want to add, demand limiting is just an example that we put in front of you guys. I think it's really intended to test exactly the types of innovation we're looking for here to expand that limit. It may not be energy or demand limiting. It may very well be a different type of service where it just meets what the customers and the grid needs are. So I want to just preface that. So, sorry. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I'm Anurag from Electric Fish Energy. We build distributed energy assets and DERMS packaged on it. My question to you is, first, thanking you that we really need to understand what exactly the consumption patterns look like, and encouraging customer participation is good. But besides just limiting the demand or like throttling the power available to consumers or EVs, what are the other physical hardening measures which there are at our disposal? You mentioned home battery, and then mega packs are something which, like Musk and Patty were mentioning. Are there any intermediary technologies which you guys are looking at to shed load? I'd love to hear about it.
Not anything behind the meter. I'm not sure if there's anything on the distribution
I
side.
would think about, so electric vehicles is an easy one today. Behind the meter, like thermal storage, from the perspective of the climate in the home or in the building. And then whatever else we come up with. I mean, obviously there's things I'm not stating right now, but there will be even more in the future from a flexibility perspective.
Yeah, I really want to point towards community scale batteries that are back-to-back by multiple theaters or multiple households. I haven't seen any.
Yeah, so for those online, reference to community scale battery as an opportunity. That's definitely an opportunity. We have that. We have a pilot, or Arcata, or not, I don't know if I want to call it a pilot. We have a program in Arcata, our Arcata microgrid, that's kind of a similar concept with the Redwood Coast Energy Authority.
I just want to put a plug in. There will be a breakout session on long duration storage at Clean Portfolio at 3 o'clock. So I think that might be the venue to discuss a lot of these maybe more in front developments, such as community microgrids.
I think we have one more online question.
One more online question. This is a good one to wrap it up. What are the sources of data and the analytic tools that are needed to make accurate forecasts on customer needs, which may be less than the customer demand? This is from Leo Trudell.
Sorry to ask you to repeat it one more time. Sorry.
What are the sources of data and the analytic tools that are needed to make accurate forecasts? That's the
Yeah,
short
so, yeah, there's all of it. There's a lot of different things we use today, whether it comes from the existing load profile, economic data, geospatial data, and everything in between that we can get our hands on to inform that, as well as existing applications for new business that we have.
Great. I think we have time for just two more questions.
Michael Dan, PG&E. I was wondering if there's been any attempt to value on-site storage or customer storage against programs like DER, whether it's customer operated or PG&E operated, whether it's at the meter with a power wall or at devices where you have a battery powered induction stove or a battery to smooth out your peaks on your water heater. Is there any attempt to try to figure out the value of that storage against the DER program where we're interrupting the customer, where we're providing more interfaces for them, where we're making them think?
Yeah, no, I think there are existing proceedings that's starting to look into that, especially by the Public Utilities Commission. We, especially in the DR side, we've kind of proposed in front of our commission, looking at and evaluating what does multiple participation in the future look like between DR programs and rate structures, because it does come up more often than not, and that really helps unlock potential for stackability and multi-use. So I think we're still, from a policy perspective, we're still having those discussions, but it's not lost on us that that is something that we will need to continue to test out to better understand what that value is, especially between now and 2030, 2040, et cetera.
I apologize. I know there's some of you that still have questions, but session is over. And if you have your second session
And,
you want to go to.
A plug for the next session. The next session is integrated grid planning, avoiding conventional upgrades. So it's kind of a natural load management is a piece of that. So if you're interested in the next session,